Hey, my name is Jacob Morgan. I'm a professionally trained futurist, speaker, and author of 5 best-selling books, including my brand new one called Leading with Vulnerability. And in the next 2 episodes, we're going to be talking about why what you've been told about vulnerability is dead wrong. We're also going to be looking at why leading with vulnerability requires you to be good at your job. And I'm going to be sharing the 5-question framework to help you lead with vulnerability inside of your organization. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to be talking about these things and a whole lot more.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Jacob Morgan. He is an international best-selling author of 5 books, including his most recent one, which we're talking a lot about here, which is Leading with Vulnerability. Jacob's work has been endorsed by Adam Grant, Marshall Goldsmith, Seth Godin, the CEOs of Mastercard, Best Buy, Home Depot, Unilever, the Ritz Carlton, and many others. He is a professionally trained futurist and a keynote speaker. And we've been talking about this distinction between vulnerability, which we all know we gotta have, and why it's difficult, why it's uncomfortable for leaders, and how to actually practically lead. What's the framework for leading with vulnerability? And there's a very specific framework. Now, if you are just coming onto this and you missed part 1, I highly encourage you to go back, listen to that. You got to understand not only about the practicality of how to use vulnerability, but actually understanding how Jacob came to the realization that he needed vulnerability, and that was actually awakened by his publisher saying, write a book on vulnerability. And he went, yeah, sure, no problem. And then, oh my God, it's real. So it's a fascinating story. I encourage you to go back. So let's get back into it here. I think that there are questions we need to ask ourselves when we're going to be vulnerable, because one of the things I've talked about with this in my own work is this vulnerability is sort of thrown out there as a big net.
Yeah.
And I say to people, listen, vulnerability is not about emotionally vomiting on other people. It's not about going in and just saying every gory detail of your reality. It has to have discernment. Like, how do you discern what to be vulnerable about and when? Because vulnerability is an incredibly powerful tool for building trust, but it can also build no trust. It can actually destroy trust if you don't understand discernment. I want to ask you about the questions we need to ask ourselves and the questions we're actually asked that make us feel uncomfortable, the questions we need to ask ourselves to learn how to be with the discomfort and step into the vulnerability.
Yeah. So there's a framework that I created, and there's actually one thing that I want to mention before we go into the framework, because I think it'll add a little bit of kind of context to this.
Yes.
And so this is this concept of the pratfall effect, which some people may or may not be familiar with. And this came up because a psychologist by the name of Elliot Aronson developed this from University of California, Santa Cruz, which is where I went to school. And this is one of my favorite pieces of research from the book that I was able to uncover. And basically what Elliot Aronson just found out is that if you're good at your job, you're viewed as very competent, and you're vulnerable, then all of a sudden you get a boost, right? So for example, if I show up to work, I'm really good at my job, and now all of a sudden I am talking about a mistake or a failure or something like that, people might look at me and say, wow, not only is Jacob great at his job, but he's also human. He's also somebody we can connect with. And you get a little boost. You become viewed as more likable, more competent, more trustworthy. But if you are not good at your job and you're struggling and you show up to work and you're constantly vulnerable, what happens is that your vulnerability will reinforce your mediocrity. So this is why it's so crucial to constantly demonstrate and show that you are closing the gap to become more competent, to practice that leadership, because it can either solidify you as being mediocre or it can boost you if you're highly competent. So having said that and kind of giving that perspective there are a series of questions that a lot that every employee and every leader for that matter should be asking themselves when it comes to vulnerability. And to give people a visual of what this framework looks like, it's kind of a wheel or maybe like a raindrop, right? So you have concentric circles starting from the center and kind of rippling out. And there are 5 of them. And these are intention, what, who, tone, and professionalism. So starting at the very middle is the intention. And every leader that I interviewed, all 100 of these CEOs, whenever I asked them about leading with vulnerability and sharing and talking about things, I would always ask them, why are you doing it? So I had some CEOs talk about divorces that they were going through. Others were talking about difficulties with family members. Other people were just talking about tough times that they've had at work. And I would always ask these CEOs, why would you share this? Why do you want to talk about your personal history in front of your employees? And they always had a reason that came back to intention. I am doing this because I want to create trust. I want to be seen as more human. I want to come up with better opportunities for new products or services. Like, there was always an intention. So the first question that everybody needs to ask themselves is, why? Right? If you're thinking about something that you want to share or do, what is the intention behind it? You need to have something, because to your point, you can't just show up to work and treat everything like a therapy session. So what's the intention behind it? Even if it's something personal that you want to share, are you doing it to be seen as more human? Are you doing it to create more trust and an engagement with your people? Why? So that's kind of the central...
Because you enjoy some good old drama.
Not a good reason.
Not a good reason. No, but it may be true.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? A lot of people do enjoy that. So
that's why reality TV is so big.
Exactly. So the reason the intention here needs to be some sort of a business-related intention that's going to allow for some progress or growth. Drama, as much as we all love it, is not going to qualify there. But for example, are you looking to become better? Are you looking to learn or grow? What is the business purpose that's going to allow things to move forward?
Absolutely.
The second part of that is actually, what is it that you want to share? So what is it that you're sharing? Is it something personal? Are you going through a divorce? Are you, what is it? What is it that you actually want to share? And is it appropriate for you to be sharing it? Right? That's a very basic question that a lot of people should be thinking about. Then
again, that's the discernment piece.
Yes.
Taking inventory of what is this?
Yes.
So if I know why I'm sharing this, is it appropriate in the context of why I want to share it?
Yes.
The first level is the intention. I want to share this because X. The second level is, does this actually validate X? Or is this just me creating some kind of drama and disguising it as my intention?
Yes. And actually, so I misspoke a little bit. So the center is the intention. The second one is actually who first, before we get to the what. The what is actually part of the intention. So when I say, what is it that you want to share, you should typically identify that in the center circle of what is the purpose behind it. So when you know the purpose of what it is that you are sharing, the kind of what is kind of blended into the intention. Yep, I get it. Then the second concentric circle outside of that is who. Who is it that you want to share things with? So you have to know your audience, right? I mean, are these people who are out to get you? Are these like sharks in the water where if they smell blood, they're going to come and rip your head off? Or are these people who are inside of your trusted circle? People who have your best interest at heart, people who are going to support you and encourage you going forward. So understanding who you're actually sharing with is also a critical element. The next concentric circle outside of that is when. Believe it or not, timing matters, right? I mean, if you have an executive who's getting into the elevator and you're running after them and saying, hey, wait, I want to share something personal with you, and the door to the elevator closes, it's not a good time. So timing does matter depending on what it is that you want to share. Are you at a crowded restaurant or bar and you want to, get into something like deep and personal? Probably not the best time. So the timing of what it is that you want to share also matters. And the timing can also be not just for a specific moment, but maybe within the context of a strategy, right? A strategic meeting, the company is about to launch something big going forward. So kind of timing what it is that you want to say with that, right? I mean, you probably don't want to talk about all your greatest mistakes and failures right before you go to a client meeting and you're going to present this new project to your clients. Probably not the best idea to do that. You're going to freak people out. So timing matters. Next is the tone. And this is something that we oftentimes don't talk about. The tone on how you deliver your message matters. So, for example, let's say we're getting to this theme of asking somebody for help. There are a lot of different ways that you can ask for help. I can come to you in a very non-vulnerable way and say, hey, Dov, how's it going? I just need your help with something really quick. And hey, I'm asking you for help, but there's no kind of feeling there. There's no connection there. Similarly, if I'm struggling with something at work, I could say, hey, Dov, I've been working on this project for a while. Man, I'm having a really hard time trying to figure this out. Can you do me a favor and maybe just spend like 15 minutes with me and give me some guidance on how I should be approaching this in the right way? That's a different way to ask for help. And this is important because it's important for the other person to identify when you're being vulnerable and when you're not. Because if you know that I'm in a vulnerable spot, you're going to be much more likely to help me versus if I'm kind of brushing it off or creating distance or acting like a jerk or just appearing overly confident. So the tone, as far as how you deliver things, matters. And lastly, the last concentric circle outside of this is professionalism. And professionalism is really acting in a way that is accepted or respected of the role that you're in. So a simple example, you're the leader of a team and somebody inside of your company and you employees giving a presentation, right? And it's the worst freaking presentation you've ever seen. And you're sitting there in front of 20 people. You as the leader, are you going to get up and say, how the hell did you get this job? Who hired you? That is complete garbage that you just presented in front of everybody. You should be ashamed of yourself. Get out. Right. Not a lot of professionalism in there. No. Similarly, if you go see a doctor and you have some sort of an illness and the doctor looks at you and says, oh my God, and they start crying like, I can't believe you have this. You're so screwed. I don't know what to do. You don't want to see that from your doctor. Not professional. So you have to, yeah.
That's the doctor you want to line up for.
Yeah, maybe.
No.
Yeah. Freaking out like,
it's laryngitis. Oh my God.
Yeah, you imagine just getting on an airplane and the pilot there is like, hey guys, it's my first flight. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to push some buttons. Hopefully we'll get to where we need to go. You're not going to be getting on that plane.
No.
So professionalism matters. Acting in a way that is expected or respected of the accepted of the role that you're in. So those are those 5 elements of the vulnerability wheel: the intention, who you're being vulnerable with, when you're being vulnerable, the tone, and the professionalism, which is what sits on the outside of everything.
I think that's just such a good filtering system because like we've been talking about all the way through, vulnerability is this thing that is this big net and we don't bother to work it out. And I love that you've broken it up in that way that allows people to actually understand what vulnerability is and how to deliver it in any given circumstance. And the other thing is that, and again, I don't know where you've gone into this, but, vulnerability is about you being vulnerable. It's not about you manipulating. And I think that oftentimes people use vulnerability to manipulate.
Yeah.
So, and if you're not sure if that works well, try it in your marriage.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Try being vulnerable in order to get your partner to stop feeling upset about something, and you will find a big backlash to that. And the only difference is that your partner is probably going to tell you the truth, that you're being an asshole, whereas your employees won't. You'll just lose their trust.
Yeah, I want to wake up in the morning. Thank you.
Don't want to go, it's getting stuffy in here. Oh, I can't really breathe. Oh, it must be that pillow on my head.
Exactly. But you mentioned something interesting, which is viewing this as kind of a filtering system, which is exactly the purpose of this framework.
Right.
And so what I always encourage leaders to do is, go through these 5 things. Sometimes it could be a mental checklist. Sometimes it's an intuitive, just takes a couple seconds. Sometimes it's a longer, more thought out process. So for example, I interviewed Jim Fitterling the CEO of Dow Chemical, and he recently came out as being gay, and this was fairly recently. And he kind of used this mental framework. He went through stage 4 cancer. A lot of people thought he was going to die. He ended up surviving. And after going through that process, he's like, wow, I'm living a lie. Like, nobody knows this about me, and I can't be who I am at work. And so he went through this checklist of, should I share this at work? Well, what would be the purpose of me doing this? Well, it's going to be X, Y, Z. Who should I share this with first? And he started with a couple of his close confidants, his circle. So he kind of went through this mental checklist.
Yep.
But the idea is that if you're going through this and you come across a no, or you don't know the answer, chances are you should probably stop. So if you don't know why it is that you're sharing it, don't sharing it.
Right.
If you don't know who you're sharing it with, if they have your best interest in mind or not, you probably shouldn't share it with them. If you don't know if it's a good time, don't do it. If you don't know if your tone is coming across the right way, if you don't believe you're being professional, then stop. Right? Use this as a filter. Ideally, kind of like, all systems go before you're taking off in a rocket ship. You want to have a green light for all 5 of these things.
Yeah.
Again, it could be just quick mental checklist, a couple seconds, just 30 seconds before you walk into a meeting, just, okay, intention, okay, I'm good. And then, you're good to go. But it's important to just at least mentally think through these things.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. As I said, I think it's a great filter. So let's just go to the other side for a minute, because you've given us some really great steps for people to follow. You give us a framework for people to do, way to check ourselves, how to deliver it, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, it's still, for many leaders, it's still nebulous on what is the benefit of this? What's the ROI on me leading with vulnerability? Talk to us about that, because I know you did a lot of research into that.
Yeah. So when I think of ROI, I think of kind of 2 pieces to this. One is the personal ROI for you as a leader, and the second is ROI in terms of the business. So the ROI on why you should do this for yourself as a leader. There are a couple stories that I share in the book that are, maybe a little bit longer, but I'll kind of sum it up in that the world around you has changed, and a lot of the outdated leadership behaviors that you are used to. So, for example, there used to be a time where Fortune magazine used to have a list, the toughest bosses in America. And it used to be a badge of honor to be on the cover of that magazine as being America's toughest boss. And it used to be a badge of honor to work for that kind of a tough boss. Yeah. Hierarchy and command and control used to make sense, right? In the 60s, that's how business was done, being the celebrity CEO.
Industrialized age.
Sure. Yeah. Not showing emotion, not talking about weakness. This used to be at one time a beneficial trait. This is just how business was done. And what happened is, even just over the past few years, the world around us has changed quickly. So there's a theory called mismatch theory. And basically what it says is that behaviors and attitudes that were once beneficial to you actually become detrimental to you when the environment around you suddenly changes. And that's exactly what's happening. Leaders were taught one way, the environment around us suddenly changed, and everything that we've been taught and a lot of our approaches and behaviors towards leadership are now starting to hurt us. Yep. Because now we're talking about things like employee experience, belonging, purpose and meaning, employee health and well-being. We're talking about all these different themes now, which means that when you look at all these outdated behaviors and approaches to leadership, you have to shed them. Otherwise, you're going to cause harm to yourself. So that's kind of the personal. It's in your best interest for your own leadership success, for your own leadership journey, to lead with vulnerability. If you want to, make an impact and unlock the potential of others, lead through change, drive business performance. If you want to be able to do that, you got to lead through vulnerability. Then we have more of kind of like the traditional ROI metrics as far as what it does for the business. And there too, this came from the 14,000 employees that we surveyed. And we found that in organizations where leaders always lead with vulnerability when appropriate, the perception of leaders inside of those organizations is that they are far more higher quality. And it's a big gap. It's over a 32% gap between the perception of high quality leaders inside of a company when leading with vulnerability is not practiced versus when it's always practiced. So just
2%.
yeah, it's a huge gap.
Yeah.
But it's also more than that. It's in terms of when you lead with a vulnerability, you create more trust. So inside of those organizations, employees are 2.2 times more likely to say they trust their leaders to do the right thing. We see that these types of leaders are able to create more engaged workforces. They're able to create more inclusive environments. They're able to create more diversity of thought. They're able to drive innovation. They're better able to manage remote teams. I mean, across the board, you see that all the metrics out there justify the ROI in terms of dollars and cents for why you should lead with vulnerability. I mean, to your point earlier, it creates trust and psychological safety as well. So we see it across the board. When you do this, just kind of as an individual level, your employees are over 5 times more likely to trust you as a leader if you can always lead with vulnerability. That's a huge number. So across the board, again, we see massive numbers here.
But as you said, I mean, I think that if you're an older leader, and by that, I mean, you might be even as young as 45, but if you're an older leader, you were probably either directly trained in the command and control or you were mentored in command and control.
Yep.
You know, and when you look at leaders like Jack Welch, famous example, fire the bottom 20%. I mean, he was on that list you talked about the toughest leaders for years, and it was very much a badge of honor. And Jack Welch, in today's, let's be clear here, in today's leadership was an asshole. He was a terrible boss. But, you know, I saw Jack Welch speak about 10 years ago in New York at the World Business Conference. And Jack Welch was talking about the generosity gene and that you shouldn't hire somebody unless they're generous. And I'm like, hello, what did you do with Jack Welch? There was no generosity in his previous leadership, but even he had gotten to the realization that Jack Welch's leadership, which was famously tough, didn't work anymore. But we needed generosity, which is what we are now talking about in a different language pattern, but about giving a shit, actually caring about your people and caring about the people you work with, not just about the job. So, you know, my point is, if Jack Welch, the guy who's the toughest of the tough CEOs, gets it, maybe you need to.
Yeah, he made some interesting pivots later in his life as far as how he talked about this. And he even acknowledged that for the future CEO, it can't be like a Jack Welch type CEO. Even when I interviewed Jeff Immelt, he's one of the CEOs I interviewed for the book, the former CEO of GE who succeeded under Jack Welch.
Right.
I asked him what were some of the biggest mistakes that you made as GE? And he alluded to this concept of he didn't lead with vulnerability. Specifically, he said, I wish I would have said, I don't know more. I wish I would have been okay with telling people that I don't have the answer more often. And so, I think GE is a good case study and a good story of that because Jack Welch created that culture. Jeff Immelt followed in those same footsteps. And both of them, I think, had a pretty tough time as the top executives of, arguably America's most iconic brand.
Yeah.
So it is an important new way to be thinking about leadership.
Yeah. The adage of we've always done it this way is a death rattle. If you're saying that, you are already digging your own grave.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Right. So, Jocob, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. It's been an amazing conversation and I think a very practical conversation. So, we talk about vulnerability as being this, quote, soft skill, but it's a practicality. It's an important practicality in it. And I love that you've shared it in that way and helped people to understand it in that way. Before we close off, and I'm going to ask you to tell people where they find out about you again, you talked at the beginning of part 1 about this transformational moment for yourself. If you were to leave us, the listener, the viewer, with a message about vulnerability in the context of how you had to understand it, that would rattle their cage in such a way that what I mean by that is that to challenge people to go do something different in the next 5 minutes or 5 days, what would that thing be?
Well, first, I guess there are a few things. Number one is to practice this concept of the vulnerable leader equation. Vulnerability plus leadership equals vulnerable leadership. I think the second piece of this is people need to acknowledge and remember that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's your greatest superpower. For a leader, leading with vulnerability, I believe, is the greatest superpower and the greatest thing that you can do to transform yourself, your team, and your organization. But as far as where to start, so you mentioned something either today or in 5 days from now. One of the themes in the book is this concept of a mountain. I mean, the cover of the book, if anybody sees it, is a mountain, and it's somebody who's looking up at the mountain, getting ready to climb it. And that's very much with intention. The end of the book, there is a concept called the vulnerability mountain. And what that means is that you have to climb this mountain. And if you've ever climbed a mountain, you've ever gone hiking, you've ever done anything like that, you'll know that towards the beginning of the mountain, it's usually pretty easy. And then the more up the mountain you go, the harder it becomes. Sometimes you're going to make some wrong turns. Sometimes you're going to get beat up. Sometimes you're going to, hurt yourself. All sorts of things are going to happen. Yeah. But the higher up the mountain you climb, the more beautiful the vistas become, the more clarity you get, the farther out you can see, the more people you're going to meet on that journey, and you will become a better leader. So what I mean by that is start by defining the base of the mountain and the peak of the mountain. The base of the mountain is something that you can do now. How can you lead with vulnerability now, tomorrow, today? What is something simple that you can do? And for everybody, it's going to be different, right? It's going to be different for everybody. We all have different comfort levels. So what's something that you could do at the base of the pyramid? And then what's something that you view as kind of at that peak of the pyramid that's like way high up there that you're like, oh man, that's going to take me a while to be able to practice that. And define what that base is and define what that peak is. And the best piece of advice I can have is whatever's at the base is what you should do now. That's what you should do tomorrow. And give yourself steps on a regular basis to slowly start to climb that mountain until you can get to your peak. Now, it's important that people do take steps to do this because one of the CEOs I interviewed, for example, he shared this story with me. Before he was CEO, he was working at a company, and he was working for a company where he had a really tough boss, like, I'm going to kick your teeth in kind of boss. And everybody worked for this executive, and one day this executive brings in his direct reports. I think it was like 10 or 12 of them. He puts them all into a conference room, the top executives there. And he starts playing a tape. He starts playing a song to them. And it's the Bette Midler song, You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings. And this CEO then starts talking about how all these employees mean so much to him, and they are all the wind beneath his wings, and that they're going to soar together. And these employees all looked at each other thinking that this guy was having a stroke.
This is the same guy who'd been really tough?
Yes, this is the same guy who was like, cursing at people, throwing stuff, like, I'm going to rip your head off kind of guy. And all of a sudden,
he had a stroke.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden you show up to work and he's wind beneath my wings. And when I interviewed this person who's the CEO of a company now, he was telling me this story and he's like, we didn't know what to do with that information. We preferred that tough son of a bitch boss to this other person who seemingly changed overnight, and we had no idea what to do with it. We didn't view it as being authentic. We didn't view it as being genuine. We didn't know who this person was. That is why it's important to kind of build this mountain and take these steps. If you show up tomorrow and you have a reputation as being like this, I don't talk, I don't share. Like, for example, my dad has that reputation. Don't talk, don't share about feelings, emotions, nothing. If I go grab lunch with my dad tomorrow, and all of a sudden he sits me down and starts like revealing everything about his childhood and his past and all that, I'm going to look at him and be like, whoa, are you okay? Like, what's going on here?
Did you get a diagnosis, Dad?
Yeah, like what, do we need to talk about something here? Like, it's weird. Similarly, if you show up to work tomorrow and you're like, hey, everyone, thanks for coming to this team meeting. By the way, I'm just getting a divorce. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm like, people are going to be like, whoa. What's going on here? So taking these steps, this gradual progress is important. So best piece of advice, create the base of the mountain, create the peak of the mountain, and take the steps to get there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Jocob, it's been a pleasure and honor, sir. Thank you. Please tell everybody where they can find out more about you.
Sure. So we have a special URL for the book, which is leadwithvulnerability.com. There's some fun bonuses and stuff like that if people pre-order it. My website is thefutureorganization.com. And my email, if people want to reach out, is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. And I mean, if you go to any book publisher, type in Leading with Vulnerability, you should be able to find it there too, if you have one that you like to support.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Again, it's been a pleasure and honor, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Business and political leaders committed to positively shaping the landscape know that they must tap into what drives human behavior. I am Dov Baron, and I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness the emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Remember that you can catch my new course on coursifyx.com/belonging, where you're going to learn how to create a culture of belonging. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can lead with vulnerability and know the distinctions between being vulnerable and leading with vulnerability. Those distinctions are important. You've been given the framework to do it. Find your base camp and start scaling that mountain. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.